So we have quite a few interesting and weird stories to talk about this week, some very, very serious ones too. Now just keep in mind that a lot of people believe that these massive stories are currently being covered up by the weird ones too, a deflection of sorts, and I tend to agree. Anyway, let's jump right into it. So things really got kicked off with an explosive expose, yes, pun intended, because we have to talk about the Nordstream explosion. So we talked about this months ago as it happened. At the time, I even mentioned the US diving teams that were coordinating with Norway for Baltic military simulations. And one prominent journalist, a man who is well respected, and that is despite current efforts to persuade you otherwise. The story was written by a man named Seymour Hersh, and this individual is most famous for his stories on the My Lai massacre in 1969. But that's not all. He also broke the story about the clandestine bombing in Cambodia. And ever since then, he broke big stories such as the Bin Laden raid, Syria, Hillary Clinton, and CIA torture programs. A Pulitzer Prize winner at the time when that actually mattered. You know, pretty much ever since journalists won for their coverage and participation in the Russian collusion hoax, with their efforts to pass it off as a real scandal, mimicking state-run talking points. Well, the credibility of that award has since been downgraded to who gives a shite. But up until recently, it did hold some weight, and this guy received one. And while to that end, the machine has come out in full force against him very, very recently, with colleagues of his claiming that he is just a quote-unquote blogger. And of course, even the status over at Wikipedia, well, they quickly altered his page to add the term quote-unquote conspiracy theorist. Seymour Hersh is just a mere conspiracy theorist, apparently, and yeah, I don't think so.
Journalist Seymour Hersh has had a long and storied career. His reporting on a massacre in Vietnam won a Pulitzer Prize.
Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who's written for the New York Times, the New Yorker, exposed the My Lai massacre.
He's won prizes for pieces on Watergate and the war on terror. At the New Yorker magazine, he exposed horrific abuse at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq.
Recent revelations about the abuse and humiliation of Iraqi detainees at a prison outside Baghdad has shocked the country and outraged the Arab world. Today, the U.S. military reprimanded at least 6 American soldiers in connection with the scandal. And Seymour Hersh, who investigated the story for the New Yorker magazine.
Americans did this to an Iraqi prisoner. According to the U.S. Army, the man was told to stand on a box with his head covered, with wires attached to his hands. He was told that if he fell off the box, he would be electrocuted. It was this picture and dozens of others that prompted an investigation by the U.S. Army.
He said, and let me tell you about that prison, Abu Ghraib, which I'd read stuff about. He said, my friends' wives and daughters are writing and saying, you must come and kill me because I've been defiled. And so what's going on? So I got into it. I mean, I knew then maybe I could find a way. And then I heard about photographs.
Cy Hersh, you came up with more than just the story. You came up with the Army investigation. Pick it up from where you got involved.
If you think it just happened in one prison and 6 kids happened to have fun doing it, well, you're wrong. This is institutional throughout the way the Army deals with detention centers in the war on terrorism.
This will be one of the craziest, most destructive things any American administration has ever done. Last June, the Navy divers, U.S. Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Now, this piece continues. It's probably the most comprehensive news story you will read this year. Seymour Hersh on Substack, you should read it. And it recounts in detail meetings with the National Security Advisor at the White House, where this was planned, exactly what explosives were used, how they were triggered, by what aircraft, on what day. So many details in here that it is not possible that it's not true. It is true.
I think this story has the same potential for destroying the ability of our president to rally the American people behind the war, because it shows something that's so dark and it's so un-American. You know, this isn't us. We're not talking about us. This is a group of intelligence officers, CIA people.
The ramifications and consequences of this particular story will reverberate throughout the geopolitical scene. 3 allies, the US, Norway, and the UK, conspired to blow up a pipeline. The full story is truly insane, and I'll put the story in a comment so you can check out the full details. Now to end that serious segment with a rather pitiful quip, although I still thought it was a good point, so I'm going to tell it to you. Anyway, I don't remember where I read this, I didn't save the tweet, but someone said, and I quote, "The United States and Norway blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. and that released 400,000 tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, a deliberate climate disaster. And it's weird how all the climate change fanatics are completely quiet about it. End of quote. Now, I just mentioned that because it's true. And I wish we could get their supporters to realize this. The people you support do not really care about the climate. They will engineer a climate disaster if it helps their overall agenda. Yes, there is no principle nor moral framework to their objectives. They use it to manipulate their followers, and their supporters do follow it. They repeat the same state-approved mantras and settle for superficial environmental messaging while they actively support those who destroy it for profit. Now, okay, let me just take a step off my soapbox for a moment, and let's get into the spy balloons, or rather, let's talk about the rising tensions with China. Around the world, more of these Chinese spy balloons have been spotted, but that's not all. They have also coordinated satellites to monitor Hawaii. And I quote, "A Chinese satellite shines ominous green lasers over Hawaiian Islands." This occurred on January 28th. A mysterious satellite was caught on camera by the telescope on Hawaii's tallest peak, as it captured an ominous green laser over Hawaiian Islands. And of course, China is claiming it's an atmospheric monitoring satellite that studies air pollution. Nothing else. Don't worry about it. Anyway, these green lasers that spread out like a grid, and as they were caught shooting down from the sky over Hawaii, they were told that these were not from a NASA satellite, but instead came from China, a Chinese official said. And yes, things are continuing to escalate. Anyway, from there, North Korea is getting into the mix. So, North Korea has unveiled a new ICBM during a military parade in Pyongyang. Now, I'm pretty convinced that before China makes a move on Taiwan, they will have North Korea do something to act as some sort of distraction. And now ask yourself, could they be used as some sort of proxy, similar to how Ukraine is being used for a wider war against the West and Russia? So, as a result of the rising tensions, and I quote, "The Air Force Global Strike Command launched an unarmed Minuteman III ICBM to showcase the readiness of the U.S. nuclear force." So yeah, as I said, things are escalating. But now we have to get into what Klaus Schwab loves, the bioweapons. So now we have to talk about H5N1, or bird flu, and is this the next big pandemic?
Over the past few weeks, there have been several reports of mammals, including minks, otters, foxes, and sea lions, having been infected with H5N1 avian influenza. H5N1 has spread widely in wild birds and poultry for 25 years, but the recent spillover to mammals needs to be monitored closely.
And I quote again, "One of the hundreds of US-funded bioweapon labs in the world likely already has a gain-of-function version of this virus engineered, with the same exact cleavage site that gave COVID-19 the mass transmissibility in humans." End of quote. Now, if you remember, this was the original gain-of-function controversy. So right here, these two men, well, they made a version of this that was airborne in their lab. And this is what led to Barack Obama, quote-unquote, pausing gain-of-function research. So yeah, that's not good. The thing is that flu is 10 times more nightmarish than SARS-CoV-2. It has a segmented genome that allows it to undergo antigenic shift and antigenic drift. And as we've seen with H1N1 in Spanish flu, it can induce cytokine storms in otherwise young and healthy people. So the problem with this bird flu is that it usually primarily affects the deeper respiratory system, and therefore is not as infectious as the common cold or COVID-19. However, they have apparently been doing gain-of-function research to make it more infectious. Now, there was a story pretty recently, I had trouble finding it, but H5N1 infected a group of ferrets or weasels or something. I think it was in Norway. And now the panic was justified because those animals have a respiratory tract that is well suited to allow the disease to filter to a human host. And yes, not good. And so, around the world, this is the claim that's being used for the destruction of poultry farms and products. So many nations are doing this. And to this end, the government of the US is testing shots against bird flu outbreaks, as the current administration weighs poultry vaccinations. End of quote. So yes, are they really going to turn me into a chicken farmer? Damn, because I'm not eating Pfizer chickens, that's for sure. Anyway, it's probably going to be a good idea to keep an eye on that story. This could be the next quote-unquote current thing. Anyway, I do think we have to mentally prepare for every possible scenario. But okay, let's get into a story that I believe is widely undercovered. And the reason I believe that to be the case is because of the severity of the disaster. This is far worse than people want to admit. Another story to keep an eye on: the disaster in Ohio. And so, the United States had a major hazardous chemical leak in East Palestine, Ohio. And of course, the media is either not talking about it or are trying to downplay the severity. Now, the fact that we are not seeing wall-to-wall coverage of the vinyl chloride train derailment and explosion in East Palestine, Ohio is insane and says a lot. An entire town cannot return home because the water is contaminated, livestock and crops are being destroyed, and in fact, a warning went out indicating that if you do not evacuate, you are risking death.
Let me be very, very clear. If you are in this red zone that is on the map and you refuse to evacuate, you are risking death. This is very serious. If you are within the orange area on this map, you risk permanent lung damage within a matter of hours or days. This is my strongest possible recommendation that is joined in by every public safety expert. If you are within this evacuation zone, please evacuate immediately.
So on the 3rd of February, a horrifying railroad accident took place. Now you might have seen the images of the flames, but you probably haven't heard that unions were actually trying to prevent this exact accident. Some of the conditions for the rail strike were related to this. You know, the rail strike that the current administration ended with massive concessions. They said it was a big win, but they did not address some of the larger concerns. Some of the conditions for this rail strike were in fact related to this exact scenario. We'll get to that in a second though. And so, as stated, this train was carrying massive amounts of vinyl chloride. And when the train crashed, obviously the chemicals began to seep into the waterways, the ground itself. And then from there, if you can believe it, a decision was made to do a controlled explosion or burn. And this was a very, very weird choice. Now, while they're saying that this controlled burn of toxic chemicals went according to plan, well, let's just say I have my doubts. Now for this segment, you're going to have to double check my facts because I'm still trying to figure it all out for myself. And okay, let's try to get into this. When vinyl chloride burns, it turns into hydrogen chloride, which, it just occurred to me, was used in World War II as a chemical weapon. Anyway, this vinyl chloride turns into hydrogen chloride when burned. It rises into the atmosphere, and as a result, it can seed the clouds, coming back down to Earth as some sort of acid rain. Vinyl chloride in doses of more than 1 part per million over an 8-hour period is extremely harmful to humans. And you know, it's not like hundreds of thousands of pounds of this stuff resulting in toxic acid in the air is not bad for humans either, because it is. Now, as I said, the reason we are not seeing wall-to-wall coverage of this is because I think it is that bad. This is really, really dangerous.
Train derailed Friday, 20 of them carrying hazardous materials as flames lit up the sky in northeastern Ohio.
The evacuation order is in place for anyone within a mile radius of the crash site.
These aren't storm clouds. This is the fucking shit! The fucking shit they burn off in East Palestine! This is not fucking storm clouds! Look at it!
I hope it is. This is horrible! Because I got arrested because I was trying to do a live report. That's what people need to know.
Officials are claiming that the air and water are safe. Residents say they can still smell chlorine. They've complained about their eyes watering when they go outside, and one woman says the noxious air killed her chickens.
Out of nowhere, he just started coughing really hard and just shut down and went very fast.
Look at all these fucking crows. I'm not kidding.
This is within 10 miles of East Palestine.
If you have not evacuated, please leave the area.
The government is telling us that East Palestine, Ohio is safe, but the people on the ground are noticing livestock and chicken die-offs. Reporters are being arrested for even trying to investigate. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we should consider that the government might be lying to you. Now I did come across a couple really good videos about this, just giving a rundown of what's known, and well, here it is.
Of the cars that crashed, 5 of them contained vinyl chloride. It's a monomer used to make PVC. The reporting on this has gotten vinyl chloride confused with polyvinyl chloride, the polymer made out of vinyl chloride. Now, the reason that this distinction is really important is vinyl chloride is very hazardous and very flammable. Polyvinyl chloride is a plastic that's used in like everything. The other thing about vinyl chloride is that it boils at 8 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's shipped in its liquid form. Meaning that when these trains crashed and these started leaking, they weren't just leaking liquid, but they were spewing boiling gas. So vinyl chloride is really toxic. OSHA has the permissible limit of how much you can be exposed to it during an 8-hour shift as a 1 ppm part per million, average over 8 hours. So prior to this, the biggest spill of this chemical was in New Jersey, where 1 train car and about 23,000 gallons of vinyl chloride were spilled, but it didn't catch on fire. Now, this crash in Ohio has 5 train cars. These kinds of tanker cars can carry between 25 and 33,000 gallons. Let's call it 250 to 250,000 pounds of vinyl chloride. That's per train car, 5 train cars. There's maybe 1 million pounds of this toxic chemical spilling into the ground and also boiling off into the air. But then it caught on fire. I think this is where the reporting is really bad because no one is mentioning what the byproduct of vinyl chloride burning is. Of the many byproducts of burning vinyl chloride, one of them is hydrogen chloride. Hydrogen chloride is really unstable and latches onto water, like just water vapor in the atmosphere, and that turns into hydrochloric acid. So right now, government officials from the railroad, both the governor of Pennsylvania and Ohio are calling burning off the 1 million pounds of this stuff a success, but not mentioning that it means that we have hundreds of thousands of pounds of acid in the air, potentially.
And I quote, health concerns are growing in Ohio as reports of animals getting sick and some even dying. The train derailment is causing struggles for not only the animals but their owners as well, end of quote. And I quote again, animals are falling sick and dying near the site of a hellish Ohio train derailment last Friday. This accident, or intentional event, is sparking fears of the potential health impacts the crash could have on humans, end of quote. And yes, I would be very, very worried. In one of the clips we watched a few moments ago, there's a guy standing outside staring at these clouds of toxic chemicals in the air, and he's filming a TikTok about it. My suggestion would be to go inside, dude. You are going to get sick. A lot of people are afraid that 10 or 20 years from now, a lot of people are going to be getting cancer from this. My advice would be, do not go outside to film a TikTok, okay? Stay inside. Do something. I don't know. I cannot give you advice really, but I'm saying it's probably not a good idea to go breathe this stuff in. No expert, but just personal advice. Try to leave town. Do not go outside to film TikToks, okay? Anyway, again I quote, this is from the next town over. The release instantly killed everyone's chickens. This stuff is catnip for human cancer. My video camera footage shows my chickens were perfectly fine before they started this burn. And as soon as they started to burn the chemicals, my chickens slowed down and they died, end of quote. However, I believe it does get worse. Yes, it does. The reason I say that is because the Ohio River is the 3rd largest river by discharge volume in the US, and it flows into the Mississippi River. As you can see, this is marked with a red dot on the map. Yeah, this is really not good. If those deadly chemicals make their way into the waterways, which evidence suggests that already happened, and it flows through our farmland, well, things could go from bad to worse real quick. And really, with all the dead animals, the dead fish, and surely in the future a human toll as well, well, those chemicals seemingly made it into those waterways, and this could become much, much worse as time goes on. I hope that is not the case. I truly do. The thing is, a lot of people are claiming that this is a disaster right up there with Times Beach, Love Canal, or 3 Mile Island. And a lot of people seem to believe that you can draw a straight line to this disaster from every establishment politician who broke the rail strike 2 months ago. Yes, the reason this is not being talked about is because it is in fact that bad. And it could have been avoided.
Workers warned us about disaster like this. I heard firsthand months ago about the corporate practice of precision scheduled railroading.
Precision scheduled railroading is shorter staff,
longer hours, longer trains, less safety, less maintenance. Do I have all that right?
Oh, you got it all right. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of the derailments that you're seeing on national TV is one of a few things. It's lack of maintenance on the track, or they've cut the track gangs too short and they can't get out to fix it, or they've cut the carmen's, which is the union that works on the rail cars. So we have one derailment here in Northeast Ohio where a wheel flange was very thin. It picked a switch and derailed the entire train. Luckily, it was full of candle wax and not something highly volatile.
Rail workers tried to strike over this stuff, but were stopped by Congress. A few weeks later, and here we are. Several Norfolk Southern cars of toxic, highly volatile chemicals exploded fantastically in the tiny town of East Palestine, Ohio.
And I quote once again, a train derailment in Ohio is currently emitting massive amounts of carcinogenic compounds into the air. This alone would be enough to be interesting, but it seems that there is more to this story. The train company itself seems to be operating hand in hand with the government in this area, going so far as to arrest reporters covering certain details of the incident. The company has a strong lobbying presence and has been trickling out preparedness grants for emergency responses and nonprofit organizations in the area that they operate, building dependency and increasing local departments' willingness to play ball with the company in suppressing information. So in short, we have government corruption leading to an unmitigated disaster, a tale as old as time itself. Or really, I should say, a tale as old as government itself? An age-old tale that just keeps being repeated. There's some sort of saying in here that applies, but I just can't seem to find it. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm done trying to be clever. Let's move on to the UFOs. Yes, now let's get into a few weird stories that have been going on over the last few days. Now, okay, I'm not going to bury the lead. Unfortunately, I do not think they are real UFOs. Although, we all know that UFOs does not mean alien craft anyway. It's just something that's unidentifiable. However, regardless, I don't think we're getting a true alien invasion. Although, there is probably some underlying reason as to why I kind of hope we do get to experience that at some point. But you know, it's probably not a good thing to hope for. Anyway. So we had a little poll on YouTube, and I just used a few basic scenarios. 1, are they legitimate UFOs coming from somewhere outside of this planet? And the reason I chose that is because multiple agencies have, well, they've made some really odd statements about this. It appears to not be of human origin, end of quote. And I quote from the US Air Force, the Pentagon does not know what keeps these objects afloat, and they have unknown propulsion systems. We're calling them objects, not balloons, for a reason, end of quote. Now this right here alludes to our next option on the poll. Are the global powers that be setting up a Project Bluebeam scenario, which most of you agreed with this possibility? And I agree, I would not put it past them. No, I would not. And then I had a few others. I asked you if global powers could be taking top classified projects out for a little test drive. Now I was thinking of a situation like this, either out of some kind of wartime posturing, or just testing out new weapons tech before the big war kicks off. Now, there is one past event that suggests that this is a viable possibility. That is, of course, besides the advanced weapons tech projects that we know about, and of course, the black budget. But anyway, a few years ago, a craft appeared in the Philippines. It was, in fact, designated as a Chinese surveillance craft. But it had this strange new cloaking ability. You can see this on the screen right now. So, the tech is getting pretty crazy. It's hard to tell what's what these days, and it's only gonna get harder.
The unidentified flying object spotted near Pangasinan could be China's Yuanmeng, the solar-powered helium spy airship and satellites for tracking aircraft carriers, which was already reported since 2015. The massive length of the ship corresponds to an equally vast size when the Yuanmeng is fully inflated, with a volume of approximately 18,000 cubic meters. The aircraft stands at 22 meters high and can carry a payload of between 4.5 and 6.3 metric tons. The Yuanmeng uses helium gas to rise, and relies largely on solar power to keep its electronics running while in the air. The airship is said to be able to fly for up to 6 months at a stretch with a large array of solar panels covering the mid-portion of the aircraft's top side.
However, I will say, once you get CNN and MSNBC running segments like this, well, I hate to break it to you, but once the Mockingbird media starts telling you that it's aliens, it's probably a good time to start questioning things. It's all very, very strange. However, I do think that this revolves around military campaigns, both present and future campaigns to be exact. However, I do have to add that there are a lot of weird statements coming out regarding their ability to maneuver. So maybe, just maybe, we can still hold out hope for legit aliens. Anyway, after the spy balloon, apparently Canada spotted another craft and had a US fighter jet shoot it down. This came after the United States announced a strange craft in Alaska being shot down as well. Now this craft was apparently cylindrical and silverish gray. End of quote. So yes, okay. Now according to the Defense Department, it appeared that this was floating and moving in some abnormal manner. They claim, and I quote, it had no perceptible propulsion system and was maneuvering in ways that defied physics. Now, as we know, the entire description of this quote-unquote craft is almost exactly what was being described by the US Navy off the coast of California a few years ago. You might remember it as the Tic Tac UFO. However, after all the bluster, the claims of it not being of human origin, all of it, well, now they're backtracking. They're now claiming that it was, in fact, a spy balloon. So once again, who knows what the truth is? And I quote, the unidentified object shot over Canada appeared to be a small metallic balloon with a tethered payload. End of quote. A tethered payload, huh? Interesting indeed. However, the weirdness continues. Additional details have been coming out regarding what the F-22 pilots who were responsible for intercepting the object that flew over the northern coast of Alaska saw. However, there have been conflicting reports from the airmen. And I quote, some of the F-22 pilots who tracked the aircraft that was downed over Alaska yesterday said that it had, and I quote, interfered with their sensors, and that they could see no propulsion systems on the aircraft, not knowing how it could possibly be staying in the air, end of quote. The pilots went on to explain that the aircraft before it was shot down would alternate from moving around 20 to 40 miles an hour in the direction of the North Pole, and then it would appear to just stop at times and float in place, end of quote. However, it does get even more interesting because then we got a bunch of reports of this happening in quick succession all over the world. And I quote, China detected a UFO in the waters near the coastal city of Rizal and are preparing to shoot it down. And then from there, the United States closed the airspace over parts of Lake Michigan due to a UFO. Eyewitnesses reported that military jets were flying in formation over Gary, Indiana as well. And then from there, the Uruguayan Air Force is investigating a sighting of quote-unquote flashing lights in the sky over their airport. We had one video from the Doncaster Airport in the UK, claiming that they caught a fast-moving object on a security camera. Now, I don't know about this one, my bullshit meter is starting to go off, but it's still a cool video anyway. Now, one of the UFOs that was shot down over Lake Huron was shaped like an octagon and was flying around 20,000 feet, end of quote. However, now we have an opportunity to get into some interesting speculation. Project Bluebeam, finally. So, okay, now for the fun stuff. A lot of people are speculating that this is some sort of setup for Project Bluebeam scenarios. You know, they could be testing the waters for such a narrative, using the unknown spy crafts as a transition into it. Never let a good crisis go to waste. But essentially, Project Bluebeam is a theory that claims that NASA is attempting to implement a new age religion with the help of advanced technology such as holographic projections, end of quote. And yes, I do not think it's only NASA though. It's not only NASA. Anyway, the idea behind the theory is that through special effects and psychological operations, a unified New Age religion could be introduced. The theory also alleges that these operations would be used to induce an alleged New World Order. And yes, I do think it aligns better with a New World Order instead of a New Age religion, but that's just me. But they're all kind of connected, aren't they? And so with the bioweapons, the climate change narrative, World War, well, if none of those allow the installment of a world government, Yeah, many people believe that Project Bluebeam is the next ploy to be used. So the speculation surrounding this surrounds a few different things. Specifically, many refer to this speech by Reagan in the 1980s.
We often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bond. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
Yes, an outside threat, an alien threat. Well, it might be the catalyst to get the masses to accept subservience. Now, I do have to say that we have had a lot of massive stories come out recently. I mean, really, the UFOs could be a distraction from many different things. We had the Pfizer documents, testimonies, the Project Veritas Big Pharma video, the United States being caught blowing up the Nordstream pipeline. We had big tech companies coordinating with the FBI to censor Americans and influence elections. And now we're getting a story about the Epstein client list potentially being revealed. And then, of course, we had the deadly chemical release disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. All of those things they would like to distract you from. I mean, really, I think they're all top contenders. There's a lot of crazy, crazy things going on, all of which they want you to not notice. And man, that Ohio story is kind of freaking me out. I hope if any of you live around there that you are safe and out of harm's way. Again, do not go outside just to film TikToks, okay? It's a really, really terrible situation with a lot of consequences. As usual, this is something that I sincerely hope I'm wrong about and just hope everything and everyone will be okay. And really, as stated, I think the UFOs are just about the war. Sadly for the aliens, if they traverse the cosmos traveling at the speed of light or travel interdimensionally, and then were just shot down by a missile, well, I'd be disappointed in the aliens. You come all the way here just to get got. It would be a shameful, shameful display. So as with the last video, I'll leave you with the question, what is really going on? Because your guess is as good as mine. But with everything that we've experienced over the last few years, would anything surprise you? With train derailments happening in Texas and South Carolina, and other major infrastructure failures happening in Nevada too. Are we being attacked by foreign adversaries? Some sort of hack to weaken us before a major military escalation. And you should ask yourself, are the UFO stories and everything else that's being used to distract us just a way to deflect away from the disaster in Ohio, the Epstein release, and the Nord Stream pipeline story? Now, I tend to believe we are at war. I believe a lot of what we are seeing indicates that we are being attacked either internally or externally. But that does not mean I'm right, so let me know what you think. For example though, here's a clip regarding the attacks on infrastructure.
In the past 2 years, the FBI has investigated more than 40 cases of rail sabotage in Washington state alone, in one state. Now, a lot of those attacks involve so-called shunt devices. Those are wires stretched between tracks that interfere with the train's electrical signals and cause derailments. In one incident, just before Christmas in 2020, a shunt caused a train to derail in Custer, Washington. That train spilled 30,000 gallons of crude oil and forced locals to evacuate their homes. Well, that's not the environmental disaster that Joe Biden talks about, because, of course, he can't buy solar panels from the Chinese to fix it. But it was, objectively speaking, an act of terrorism. The interesting thing is, very often, in fact, in the majority of cases, people who commit acts of terrorism against infrastructure, whoever they are never punished. And the ones who are caught aren't really punished. One woman who tried to destroy trains using a shunt got out of jail after only a year. Oh. So no one's paying any attention and no one really seems to care, because what does that have to do with environmental racism and climate? And possibly as a result of that attitude, there are an awful lot of train derailments in this country, many more than you may realize. In the last calendar year, more than 1,000 trains went off the tracks in the United States. Well, how's that for a metaphor? Just today, 2 more trains derailed. One of them was in South Carolina and one was in Texas near Houston. The train near Houston was also carrying hazardous materials, as so many trains are. What's going on here exactly? We're not even going to guess. But we can tell you the chaos is not limited to our rail system. There have also been many recent attacks on our power grid. Very few of those attacks have been widely reported. Last year, there were more than 100 attacks of them in the United States, attacks on our power grid. In North Carolina this winter, for example, nearly 50,000 people lost their power in freezing temperatures when somebody shot up 2 energy substations. And so on. Why is it not a big story? Oh, it's not a story at all. And then, of course, at the same time, we've also seen a series of bizarre accidents befalling the food industry, threatening our food supply. That would include unexplained fires and plane crashes in processing plants, to chicken feed that seems to stop egg production.
However, that is not all. The quote-unquote "we are at war" theory even applies to the Project Bluebeam theories as well. As in this clip, we have a scientist from Harvard claiming that the military uses holographic projections to mess with planes, and they train by doing this to our own pilots.
There's something called like Project Bluebeam.
Yeah, good one.
What is that?
That's
lasers, right?
Yeah, I can actually talk about that one, but that is it's really bad. But you know the people that see orbs in the sky, go around that fly faster.
UFOs.
UFOs.
Yeah, there's Navy pilots. There's multiple Navy pilots who talk about they got their they were flying F-18s. These Navy pilots, and one of them's coming in here in 2 weeks. He's Ryan Graves.
Okay.
He's a Navy pilot flying off the coast of North Carolina, and they got their radar upgraded on their F-18s, and all of a sudden they were seeing these things darting around on their radar.
Okay. Don't tell him what I'm about to say and see if he knows about it.
Okay.
So what we do is we play with our own forces to make sure our trickery will work on the enemy. And those are directed energy weapons of where we do intersecting beams or focus beams into the atmosphere. And notice they're always in the atmosphere to excite the electron orbitals of the oxygen and nitrogen in our atmosphere, and it causes a glow and it causes ionization. That ionization shows up on radar, and it's like a cat laser pointer, and we're making planes chase them.
That's exactly how they describe these things moving, like laser pointers.
Yeah, and so we can do it in 3 space. We can make it look like
in 3-dimensional space.
Yeah, and we can make it look like an entire fleet is about to drop bombs on, let's say, Europe, and then just have them disappear. And they get all their planes up in the air, and we attack them from the other direction, assuming we're attacking Europe.
Who is doing this? The Navy, you said?
Somebody. Let's just say a group.
And you know this for a fact.
I know for a fact, yeah.
I am sure we will find out the truth eventually, and that's because the truth always seems to have more endurance than lies. At some point in time, the truth is going to outpace the narrative. Until then, let me know what you think, and stay safe, because either way you look at it, we are living through a monumental moment in history. Once again, this is HelioWave. If you like the content, like, comment, and subscribe. Share the video if you want to. If you're in a position to, consider subscribing on Locals or Subscribestar. As always, make sure you disobey those true fascistas, and yes, I do hope you have a good night.